Hello and welcome to the From Blog to Book webinar. I am here with Heather Doyle Frazier, and I am Danielle Baird. I'm a graphic designer and brand strategist, and Heather and I are the co-creators of the Writers Workshop. And hi, Heather.
Hello.
Heather is a coach and a creative development specialist, and today we are going to be talking about how you can leverage your existing blog, your existing social media presence and posts, and to use all of your existing writing to help you jumpstart the creation of your book. So let's dive in.
Right.
Where should we start today, Heather?
I think one of the biggest questions that we get is, so I have so much writing. I have so much that I've done. I tweet all the time. I do daily Facebook posts, and I have a blog, and I, do all of these different things on social media. I need to write a book, and everyone tells me I need to write a book. How do I start? What do I do? Can I just pick all this up and put it in a book? Is that a good idea? I mean, people just are trying to find the best way to do that. And so, and that can be really overwhelming, and it can be a little bit unnerving because you don't know what to include or what not to include, and how to let that kind of help you, let what you've already done help you, even if you're not picking up exactly. So maybe we should start there about how to kind of sort through all of this writing that you have, this prolific writing that you have.
Yeah, because it's really easy to maybe not realize even how much content you're creating. It's a Facebook post here, a blog post there, and suddenly, if you were to print it all out or total it all up, like you have pages and pages and pages, or a big old stack of content. And the thing that I talk a lot about with my clients from, just the technology side and strategy side is, a lot of times with social media or even your blog, it's kind of a flash in the pan medium where it's up there for a second, or, it's in your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed for a little bit, and then it goes away. And if someone wasn't online that day, they might have missed it. And so, creating the...
We're online, they might have missed it.
Exactly. It's just Facebook algorithms, or, if they had too much email that day, they might have missed yours. And so, I'm sort of teasing our topic for next week a little bit, but it's just like a book is an amazing tool to have in your marketing chest, just to really help you leverage your message for your business. And so, I think I wandered off on a tangent there, but I think the question that we get is, can't I spent so much time writing this post. It's already edited. I think it's good to go. Can I just copy and paste it? And so the short answer is no. But don't despair. We've got some great tips for you, and like Heather said, on how you can leverage that going forward.
Yeah, so the short answer is no, because you definitely cannot just copy and paste everything you do. Like, you just can't say like, well, I did, 50 posts this month. I'm just going to take all those and make a book out of it, or whatever. You can't do that. There might be one post in there that is just perfect to go into a book, and there doesn't need to be that much done to it. But by and large, it's pretty rare that you are not going to touch them at all, and that you're just going to put it in the book. And that is because, and as you were saying, Danielle, like, it is sort of social media posts and, blog posts, email, newsletter, all these types of things. They're very immediate. They are, you write it, it's there, it's gone. And it's usually something about that is, it's extremely immediate. And you don't have to connect yesterday and today and tomorrow. You don't have to connect a thread of any kind. You can say, this is what's in my mind today. This is what I'm writing about. And so I'm going to talk about that. And when you're writing a book, though, although you may have a piece of all the posts that you've written, you most likely are not going to include them in the order that you posted them, because things just sort of, even in conversation, like you were just saying, Danielle, oh, I don't know how I got off on this tangent over here. That happens in writing all the time. And it can happen during your post. It could happen like the next day. You could be, talking about wanting to, change the world in some way on one day, and then the next day you're talking about what you had for lunch and how, like that, necessitates you wanting to have change in your life, but it doesn't work as something that's going to come right after that other post. So when you are looking at a book, you want a thread to be taken throughout the whole book. And whether or not people do read books differently. So some people will read cover to cover. Other people will read, I'm just going to pick it up and read this chapter or this essay or however it's organized. Some people might even just read a few pages. So you want things like a chapter to be able to stand on its own, or an essay to stand on its own, or a story to stand on its own. But you also want to feel a flow from the beginning to the end. So, because a lot of people do read books cover to cover. That's just how we've been kind of programmed to do things. And so many people read it that way. So you want to make sure that when you're taking your posts or your blog or whatever it is, you're bringing that content into the book in a way that's going to make sense for a reader who is either picking it up and consuming it one little chunk at a time, or reading it across the whole thing.
Exactly. And I think the other thing too, that you were just talking, with a client about in a session recently, is with blog posts, with Facebook, everything is typically very short and punchy and to the point. Mm-hmm. You're not kind of writing these longer, even 1,000 to 2,000 word essays are not that common, mm-hmm. In those formats. And so, you've got at the beginning, to me, it's a little bit more of a journalistic style, which I also studied in school. And so it's like, you're going to grab your hook, you kind of make your points, and you may kind of even trail off a little bit toward the end because people, may or may not read the whole article. And it's very different with a book. It's a slower.
You have time to build that relationship with the reader. You're building their trust. You're building a relationship. You're giving them little pieces of the puzzle as you go along, and then you might come back to something too. You might use a little bit of repetition, not redundancy, but repetition to make a point. And when you're in it for the slow game of a book, that really makes sense to bring something back. And maybe you might not say it in the same way, but you're going to reinforce things that you want the reader to take away across the whole book.
Yeah. And it's, even if you think just in your own life about how you digest a book, I think occasionally a book will grab me and I will read it in 1 to 2 sittings, and you just can't put it down. But I think, a lot of times you may read it in 20-minute chunks, before bed, or, maybe on the train on the way to work every day. And so I think, like you were saying, that kind of a little bit of redundancy, a little bit of, just reinforcing your message as that thread all the way through is really important, just because of how your book will be, consumed, and it is that longer relationship.
Yeah, and it's not that you don't need to be really succinct and really clear in your writing. You have to be that. You have to really choose your words purposefully, and actually you need to do it even more so in a book than you would in a blog post, because this book is going to be around forever. Or at least you want it to, right? But once it's here, it's here. And the way that things are done now, if you want to, let's say you're self-publishing and you want to upload a new version of your book, yes, you could do that. But all of the people that bought your book, they have the book forever. I mean, until they decide to not have it. But you can't take it back. So you have to be super purposeful about all the words you choose, about the pacing of your language, and it's not something that is like, oh well, I could just change that if I want. No, you can't. You are going to have something that is going to be in print or digital, but either way, it's out there, and you're not coming with the book. You don't, like, a little Heather isn't with the book. So if they get confused or they're not clear on something, there's not going to be, well, what I meant to say here was.
Yeah, there's no comment section that comes with your book.
There's no responses there. So you have to put everything in. You have to leave nothing on the table. You have to handhold them across the threshold into the next room. And that's not talking about like dumbing anything down at all, but you just have to be there. You have to, your words have to be what supports them throughout the whole journey of your book.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if it's not already clear, both Heather and I we have such a commitment to this process that is writing a book. You know, this, like, we're not going to sugarcoat and tell you that this is something you can crank out in a couple of days. Like, you know, this is a longer process that you're going to be committed to. But I think we'll also both agree that it's so worth, like, the effort and the labor of love that is creating a book. But, you know, it's not easy.
And not all of it's hard either. There are places that are really easy for you because you're in the flow and you just like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm bringing that in, I'm doing this, and that feels super good, and that's why you want to keep doing it. But it's not just like done, you know, that doesn't happen very often anyway. And I think even for the people that do write in these really long, like marathon writing situations, I don't think that we see everything that is happening. So maybe they do write their whole book in a week. Maybe that is happening. But they're writing all day long. They're not, you know, like doing other things. They're just like really writing all day long. And they also probably have had this going on back here. So you may not, they may not have been physically writing the book, but they were writing the book back here. And so when they say, when some people say, oh, I wrote this book in a week, that's the first draft. I guarantee you that wasn't like the end of the process. That was the first draft. And then they went back and had to do some revisions and had to do some editing and had to, you know, tweak things here and there. And the book changed. But that initial outpouring, maybe for some people it is like that. But what you're not seeing is all that's happening back here, because it's pretty rare that you wake up with a book idea and write a book that day and it's done. That just doesn't happen.
No. I think that's such a great clarification too, because I think, you know, sometimes when inspiration strikes, or, you know, the synthesis is complete in the back of your head. I know I do a lot of pre-writing mentally while I'm walking the dog and all of that, so that when I finally do sit down, that, you know, it's a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you know, it's that revision process, and that's kind of what we're talking about here today. You know, your blog posts and your social media posts are kind of these pieces of your rough draft that might be kind of scattered, and you can collect them all together. And so then what would you recommend them, Heather?
There's a couple different ways that I see really working. One, and we talked about this in our first webinar, which was your book blueprint, or your TOC, your table of contents. If you have a clear idea about what you want to cover in your book and you create a table of contents, then you can look at everything that you've written and kind of slot those pieces into the table of contents. So that's the first part of that. So you're looking at all of this that you have, you're putting it into a table of contents, and that's like step one. That's one way to do it. Another way is to, look at everything you've written across the whole, a year or however long or whatever it is, and start sorting them into kind of content chunks. And you may find you have maybe 7 or 8 or 10 different main things that you talk about. That you can use those to then create your table of contents. And so you can go both ways. You may also discover, if you use the first way of like, okay, I've created this table of contents, I'm slotting all my writing into it, then you may discover when you're sorting things, you know what, I have all of this over here that does not fit into any of these categories that I've created in my table of contents, but they're really important, and they all sort of fall into these 2 areas. Maybe you've just discovered 2 more parts of your book that you didn't realize you had, or that might be the next book. If they really don't fit, but you love what they say, then that's sometimes a clue, like, well, it might not fit in this book, but it goes in the next book.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that a lot, because, we are, diverse writers, diverse thinkers. You may talk about a variety of topics, and that's all perfect. And so, you don't have to feel that pressure that you have to like, or just jam.
Yeah.
And so my first book is going to be 1,000 pages. Like, you don't have to try and get it all in on the first one.
Mm-hmm. Because, we do, as writers, we do write about lots of different things. And just because you wrote about it doesn't mean it needs to go in this particular book. It can go in another book, or it can be just something that you needed to write. Not everything you write has to go into the book. I know that when I'm working with clients, a lot of times they'll create something and it's really well done, and it was really what they needed to write in order to get to that next step. But when we look at it kind of in the broader picture of what their book is, sometimes we realize, you know what, this piece was the backstory that you needed in order to move forward and write that next piece. It doesn't have to go in the book. And so if it's feeling forced, it usually means it is forced, and maybe you should pull it out. Maybe it goes into another place, maybe it doesn't, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think we might have talked about this metaphor before. I can't remember if it was on a webinar or just, on the phone one afternoon. But this idea of how you are going to be kind of the expert guide for your reader, taking them through the path. And so as the expert guide, you may have gone out and explored ahead of time and not taken the straight line through. You might have gone this way and that way, and you've, gone all through the forest to find the best way. And so you don't have to take your reader with you on all the zigs and zags. Like, you're kind of come back and give them the nice, smooth path through.
Yeah. Because they don't need to have like brambles in their hair and like crawling through and all that kind of stuff. Like, you needed to do that to find the best way, but they don't.
Yeah. I love that visual of the.
Another thing that I was, thinking when I was talking just a second ago, sometimes after we think, okay, here's all my writing. This is all that I've done. This is what I'm using to write my book. This will be my book. But sometimes when we put it all together, we realize there are major pieces that are missing. And so even though you may say, I'm building my book from my blog, or I'm building my book from these posts, that doesn't mean that you have to stick to that. You can add what needs to be added to make it just what it needs to be. Because when you were writing those posts, you weren't thinking about a book. You were just writing for that day. And so when you come to this new medium, you're going to see, you know what, I need to create some more sometimes. And that's okay. Don't be afraid to venture out of that and just create something new. You will be revising what you have already written to fit better in a book format, but you also most likely will be creating some pieces here and there to make sure that you can take that reader on that path that goes all the way through the forest and doesn't just stop like 3/4 of the way through.
It's like, good luck getting out. um, yeah, and so, I think like another thing I've heard you talk about too is, in looking at the outlining or, in the blog posts and in different pieces, like say you have a 2,000 word blog post and you might have subheads that are in there as your little guidepost. So out of those 2,000 words, it may only be the second section that you're like, oh, this is for the book. And it's okay to prune the rest of that, or like you said, to rewrite and add things. And so I think what we've both seen is there's a lot of kind of like dumping out like this jigsaw puzzle that you're going to kind of break apart and move around until it really fits.
Mm-hmm. Like this is all that you have. Like you have all these pieces up here, and then you can say, oh, this one, I want this one here. This one fits right there. Okay, this one over here, I need to put it down here. I need more support here. I need like that sort of thing. Or even if you were thinking not like in a jigsaw metaphor, but like with colors, like, oh, I need to have a strong foundation. I like this color down here. Then I like this color up here. I want some light up here. And that's your writing and those, how they fit together to create this masterpiece.
Love that. Bring it into painting.
I also wanted to talk about, so we've been talking a lot about like blogs and posts and things like that. But so with my book, 40 Weeks, this book started out as, I got the idea to do this book from some tweets that I was doing. I was tweeting every day, and of course that's only 140 characters. That's it. And what I found was I was getting a lot of engagement. People really, really loved what they were reading, and so I thought I feel like I have like this, like a little seed in each one of these tweets. And so I pulled them all into a document, and I used those tweets as placeholders for myself to get me thinking about what I wanted to write more on. So there is not one single page in that book that is taken verbatim from what I did, not one. But they were sort of placeholders and idea generators for me as I was writing. And so that's kind of a different way that you can use things that you've done. And it looks, I don't think anybody would ever think when they read that book that, oh, that was, from her Twitter feed. And it really wasn't, but the ideas were.
Yeah. And so like when I hear you talk about, using them as placeholders, it kind of, you were dropping little breadcrumbs for yourself as you were going through the writing process. And I would imagine that it also helps take away some of that anxiety over the blank page.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so there were times when I was at, like, I came to the page where this particular idea was like, I don't really want to write about that. And so then I would just like find one that I wanted to write about, and I would write on that. And then there were other times where I had finished one and I was like, and I was feeling super inspired about something else that wasn't anywhere near that. And so I just started, that just helped to like kickstart me. So there's little things that we can use that we've done in a different way that we may not have thought of.
I love that. It's just like you're helping out your future self.
Mm-hmm. And then the majority of the time, I wasn't looking at a blank page because I had given myself little placeholders. That's what the table of contents does too. So we were talking with a client the other day, and I gave a suggestion, which I didn't really think much of, but at the time it didn't seem that big of a deal, but I think it kind of goes to what I did with this, with kind of picking out those Twitter things and putting them in my just on my blank page. When you take your table of let's say you're doing a chapter-based book, and you've done your table of contents, you have it for chapter 2, and you just start writing chapter 2, and you look back at the table of contents, but you're not really focused on it. One of the easiest things to do is to just copy and paste that table of contents for chapter 2 and put it in your chapter 2 document, and then start writing under those things. That's the same idea. It's exactly the same.
Yeah. And, it's because he was sharing, he had, written, and then he kind of went back and looked and went, oh, I sort of wandered, because this piece I meant to put here, and this piece I thought I might put there. And, I think it's just, bringing that little breadcrumb over with you just helps keep it top of mind. And so you don't accidentally do repeat work that you've already done. I know I've been guilty of it in the past, and it's like you get there and you're like, oh yeah, I already figured this out. I totally forgot.
Well, and the other thing is, so let's say you're writing and then you realize, I left out a huge chunk. This has to go here. And then it's not like you're married to that, what you put on the page. You can say, okay, that means I need to change right now. But if you hadn't had that structure there for yourself, you may not have seen the whole. You may not have been able to be as agile and flexible with your writing.
Yeah. So, I think, the sort of big takeaway that we just kind of keep undercutting here is, just with all of this, it's just looking for little ways to help yourself and to support yourself as you're going through this process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this kind of leads right into, how do you make decisions about what stays in or what goes in the book, and then what you just don't need to include? I think that the temptation, as we said before, is just to say, well, I've done all this work. It's all going in. And while that is the temptation, that's not usually the best way to go. Because you want to make sure, like we were talking about before, that everything is really purposeful. Everything is leading the reader down the path, the direction that you want them to go. And yes, you can move things around, but some things just don't need to be there at all. And so really we've been talking a lot about like more detailed looks, like with those little breadcrumbs and things, but you also need to take kind of a broader picture look as well. Overall, does this piece that I want to include, is it serving my reader? What do I want my reader to leave with in this chapter? With these essays, or whatever you're writing? What do I want them to leave with on a bigger scale with this whole book? And so that's a good question to ask yourself as you're, looking at these different pieces to include. Is this going to further my goals with the book, or is it going to hinder it, or is it going to take away from it? If it doesn't fit into it, then it probably doesn't belong in the book. Not to say it doesn't belong somewhere else, but it doesn't belong in this book.
Yeah, and I know in one of the earlier webinars, we talked about some of those key questions that you ask yourself at the beginning of the book. Can you remind us what those are, just in case people haven't seen that one?
Well, you want to start with like why you're writing the book, and then what your reader is going to get from the book. And that you can say book broad, or like you can whittle it down to like this chapter or whatever. You also want to look at, who is my reader, because that's a key question as you're moving forward, in terms of if you have kind of a composite idea of who your reader is, it's going to help you to create the best experience for them. If you say, my ideal reader is, in kind of this age range, They like these types of things. They're, you have kind of, and maybe you have a friend who fits this ideal perfectly. Or maybe it's like the composite of like 3 or 4 of your friends. I would write out who that person is, and you can post it, in your writing space. Or if it's a real person, you can even put a picture of the person there. And you can say, okay, would Julie get this? What do I need to give here to make sure Julie can get this? And we'll find it really interesting and worthy of her spending her time on this book, because there's lots of things that people can do, and you want them to feel good about what they've invested in your book.
Yeah. And so like, I think answering some of these questions can be very challenging. But the benefit of doing some of this work up front is like, so now, as you're slotting things, as you're trying to decide, does this fit? Do I have a hole here? You have some objectives that you already identified that you can really check it against. And so it can help you be more objective in making these decisions, because sometimes, it's easy to get emotionally attached to something that you've written, but I've found that it's so much easier to make those decisions if you can look and go, okay, this is what I wanted to do. This is who I'm doing it for. Does this fit? Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier to kind of hear that internal yes or no.
Mm-hmm. It's a litmus test that is really helpful. And if you don't have something like that, you will get to a point somewhere in the process where you're going, and I know this because I've just seen it so many times, and I even experienced it to a degree of like, I don't know, I'm going to throw up my hands here. I can't even tell what is up or down anymore. I've been in this too long. I don't even know. It doesn't make sense anymore to me. I don't know why I'm writing this book. That does come up. And so if you have this already just right there that you can look at and be like, okay, take a step back. Who am I writing this for? What do they need? How do I want them to feel when they're reading this? Will this particular piece serve those purposes? Yes or no? It's really helpful.
Yes. Because, and yeah, you're definitely going to hit a little wall like that at some point. And so again, all of these little foundational pieces are there for you to be able to fall back on, when you've been in the forest for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sure you even experienced that with your coloring book, Danielle.
Oh yeah, totally. Like, I think it might have been just before the halfway point or right around there. There was definitely a tipping point where I was like, oh, I've got enough momentum now where it felt good.
Right.
But yeah, there's just like a slog in the middle where you're like, oh, like, and I found that you kind of hit that on just a variety of creative projects. I think it's in, creating a new program, in launching your website, in doing a book, in a painting. I hit like the ugly point. There's like this part in the middle of a paint.
Anything big is like that.
Mm-hmm.
Even something like an organizational project. Like, it always looks worse before it looks better. It always is more messy before it gets more organized.
Yeah, and there's that point where you're like really tired and you like kind of like look up and you're like, oh my God, I think I've made it worse.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what have I done? But then it's like, if you keep going just a little bit further, it's like, bing, it all fits together.
And so this is a little bit off topic, but that happened in my book when I had this idea to do something different. And so I started down that path, and it was feeling really hard. It was feeling really wrong. It was feeling like, but I was like, no, I'm doing it. I'm totally doing this. I am doing this. And I got like maybe halfway through of kind of incorporating this piece that I thought was a good idea. And I had to check myself and be like, wait a second. This is not what needs to happen. And you need to listen to like, I'm getting physical, like physical manifestation of the wrongness of this. I'm like, I'm getting a headache. I'm like sweating. I feel kind of sick to my stomach. That was all kind of signs that I wasn't paying attention to, because I was like, I am pushing through. This is working. No, it's totally not. This is not working. And so I had to stop and undo all of the things that I had done. But I had gotten about halfway through the book with that. And I was just like, oh no, what have I done? What can I, like, I need to fix this. But there's a fine line between, like, is it like what the book needs or not what the book needs? And you really have to just keep checking in to see where you are with that.
Yeah. And I think as a creator too, like, sometimes I think you need to follow some of those threads, even if they're so wrong.
Yeah. I needed to do that to know that it wasn't right.
Yeah. Cause like, if you never went down that path, you could have published and been like, oh, I don't know. Like, maybe I should have done that. I wonder, but now, like, nope.
Yeah.
That was a do not enter sign.
Yes. It was a clear, like, it was one of those, I needed to go down the path for just a bit to see, like, yeah, this one is dark and scary, and you just need to turn around and go to the light one again, because this is really, no, we're beyond.
Yeah.
Sorry for that tangent.
No, I think that's so important, and it kind of ties in with in some of the earlier webinars, like we were talking, and so I think that's like such a great way, just in your description of how we can use our bodies and use our intuition to know what is or isn't working. Because cerebrally, I remember that concept, and we're both like, yeah, that sounds good. I think it's really awesome. And then you call me, you're like, yeah, it's not going to work. And I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah. So, so maybe we should talk a little bit about how when we've talked a little bit about this already, but kind of letting those existing blog posts or whatever they are, really looking at them as like a starting place. So I want, like, with the intention, like, I want to expand this if I can expand this. I want to go deeper if I can go deeper. And there will be some places where, no, I really can't go deeper. This is as deep as I can go. This is expanded as I want to make it. This is a complete story just as it is. But there are other places where if you go in with that intention of, can I push myself here to expand this? Can I push myself here to make sure this is as complete as it can be? Because as we talked about before, blog posts are really quick. They're not giving the complete, full story, hardly ever. They're just giving snippets here and there. And that's what people expect. So that's what they want. But in a book, you need to kind of flesh all that out. And whereas that blog post might be the skeleton, you need to.
And so, with that, like, if you have your skeleton or you kind of have a piece that you're looking at and you're like, yeah, this, it feels a little light, but I'm not like hot. Are there any prompts or questions or things that you can kind of answer? Or I'm just wondering if you can kind of break down your thinking a little bit and how you look to expand.
Yeah, I think one, I would ask myself, am I willingly giving all I can give here in terms of, like, vulnerability or the background story or something like that? Then, so you're asking, like, for yourself, do I feel like this is, and if your intention with the piece is like to be moving, am I moved by this piece? Then on the flip side, looking at your composite person or the person, your audience, and asking, okay, if I read this from Julie's perspective, if I really try to put myself in her shoes, does she have everything she needs to get from point A to point B? I want her to have this understanding by the end. If I think about, like, where she is in her life and with the lens that she's coming to this piece with, Will she be able to make those connections? Will she be able to get from A to B? And if you're really reading critically, something will either come up as a, you know what? I think I need to make I need to make this transition a little more smooth or something. Or I feel like I've left out that little piece. And then other times it may be, you know what? I think it's good to go. It feels good to me. That being said, there is a point at which you cannot, because you are so wrapped up in your own perspective, you can't see past it sometimes. And so that's why it's really good to have someone else, like an editor, come in and help you with that as well. Because even, even people who have done lots of writing, even people who are really excellent, they still bring their own perspective, even when they're trying not to. And so it's super helpful to have that outside perspective come in, whether it's like a writer's circle or an editor, but just some kind of outside perspective. That being said, if you choose someone who is not like an editor or something like that, you want to be really careful about who you're choosing. You don't want to just choose any random person. You really want to look for that person who is your audience. You want to say like, okay, I think that this person is the type of person who would read this book and enjoy this book. That's who I'm going to ask to look at it. Not just like my sister who she may or may not want to read it, but she's my sister, so she will, but it's not really for her.
And so, when you're receiving feedback from someone who is not your ideal reader, your ideal client, your ideal customer, it's really hard sometimes, I think, to put that filter up and to not necessarily give so much weight to their feedback versus someone who, really is your reader and who, would love this book. If they're the one telling you like, this piece, I'm confused. Then you should listen. But like if your husband or your partner or your friend has no idea what you do, like has no interest, besides they love you, so they support you. But like if they would never in a million years pick a book like yours up off the shelf, like not necessarily the person that you want to get feedback from, especially when you're kind of in that early tender development stage.
And because it could take you down, it could be like, it could kind of wound you a little bit, but it also could take you down a path that you never intended to go, in terms of like, if they say, oh, you need to throw in a bunch of blah, and then you throw in a bunch of blah, and then you're like, that's not the book I wanted to write.
Yeah, like, I mean, I don't know if a good parallel is like interior decorating advice, or like if your style is very like clean line, modern, and your friend or someone likes very rustic, it's like you wouldn't necessarily take something out of their house and stick it in the middle of your living room.
No, you wouldn't take, the plaid covered cushions or pillows into your IKEA living room. It wouldn't work very well.
No. And they mean well, like they want to help and they want to give you and they're giving their best and probably honest feedback. But it just might not be a good fit, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and just like, the rustic look they wouldn't want your, pared down minimalist shelving in their house either. They'd be like, that should be in my garage. Like it goes both ways.
Totally. And so, it's like, and again, I think having some of those questions too, when you're asking for feedback from people, whether that, I think you can even tell them like, this is what I'm trying, this is where I'm going for. These are my goals. Is it working?
Yeah.
And sometimes that can, giving people some framework for the type of feedback can
Hmm.
help you really get some of that more constructive criticism that's going to help you take your book forward versus just being like, yeah, I liked it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and that can be challenging to find, just in a friend, family member, coworker, because they love you and they want to encourage you, and that is really important to feel supported as you're going through the process. Um, but I think you also want to make sure that the piece is the best it can be before you go to print.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so just making sure, and they may they may like just your tweets or whatever, and because they are so short, they're only 140 characters and they just take a second, they may not want a book of essays or whatever it is. So they may even like what you've done in the past, but they're really still not the audience for your book, and that's okay. But finding those people that are is can be a real help.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
there is a place where this where you may want to have a session with a professional editor who can is just has that expertise and that training to be able to look and like zero in and be like, oop, right there,
Yeah.
or this is amazing, and you may not even realize that that piece was like a shining star and that you can sprinkle that through the rest. um, I like we were just, we had a client session and, I had read it and it's like, oh, this is like, it felt really good to me. And then Heather came in and looked and when, had this amazing feedback that like I didn't even, necessarily think of. And then by the end of the session, kind of like where it was gone, I was like, wow. Um, and so I think pretty highly of myself. I thought that I knew what was going on.
You did, but it just there were some pieces that you know could just take it a little bit more.
Yeah. And those extra pieces I think are just what elevates it, from good to great or from great to off the charts amazing. And, that's why this is your area of expertise. And I'm a little bit of a dabbler. Um, and so, I can't speak highly enough for, making that investment and, just to find an editor that you work really well with who can help you, bring your message forward in the best way possible.
Mhm. I even hired an editor for myself because it's important, and we can't sometimes see out of our little box.
Yeah. And I mean, I saw that too with my book. I mean, I did a coloring book that has, I think there's text on maybe 5 pages. But I still hired an editor to come through and look. And, I think that the changes that you recommended for my introduction, and I think I had to write 2 more paragraphs. Like it was not,
Yeah, it wasn't like huge. It was just like just a little bit more.
but that like little bit more, like, so on my end of the effort, it maybe took me another hour or whatever to kind of finesse and push it a little bit farther. But looking back now, had I not done that, I don't think that it really did my story justice. And I thought it did but what you told me is like, well, you're living it,
Yeah.
and even like my husband read it, but like he lived it with me. So it's just like mentally, I think sometimes we can fill in those gaps and like I really had no clue that I didn't finish telling the story. And you were like, and then what? And yeah, that feedback was invaluable.
Well, I'm glad. It's kind of like when you're driving somewhere that you've been many times, or you take a walk on a route that you always go on, and if someone said to you, "Oh, tell me how to get there," And then you have to check yourself a little bit, and you're like, you know, I don't really know what the name of that street is. I really got to think about it, because I mean, I know how to get there, but I don't know how to tell you how to get there when you just tell me right now, like, tell me now. I have to think about that, because I'm going to have to like put in a little bit more effort, and I'm going to have to pull out specific things as guideposts to get you there. I'm going to tell you, instead of just like, oh, you just go a bit down here and then you turn right. Then you'll say like, no, I can't just tell her that. She'll never get there. What do I need to tell her? Okay, well, you're going to be walking along for about 5 minutes. You're going to see this beautiful garden on your left. And that's when you want to take a right. But then you're going to go further down the path. It's going to look like you're getting a little bit off track, but you're not. You're going to see a pond. Once you see the pond, then you're going to take a left. Then you follow that a little bit more, and then you're going to see this really wonky tree. It looks like 2 trees in one. And there is going to be the most amazing picnic spot there. So if you want to take a picnic, that's where you should do it. And then so that's what you would, but you wouldn't be able to tell that person, this is how you need to go. You just be like, oh, just go down there a little bit, and then about a mile down, whatever. But when you really pause and think, no, I need to be really specific. I need to be really careful with this person, because I want them to get there, and I need to give them the little places along the road. We don't always think of that, because we see it all the time. We're living it. We are breathing it. So it doesn't come as second nature sometimes to give all those details. But when you're writing a book, you have to give all those details.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy. Such a great analogy. And it's totally true. It also reminds me of like, if you get a recipe like from your grandma.
Oh, a pinch of this, a skosh bit of that, this of this.
Like a handful, like your size, like your cute little grandma hands, or like my big hands. But it's the same kind of description, like where they really have to like break it down. And sometimes they're like, I don't know, I just, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And you have to go and like watch them with a notebook.
Yeah.
To capture it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how we got that to that spot, but that's a good story.
Yeah, I think it's, it's about putting yourself in your reader's shoes.
Yes, it is.
And, and helping see those gaps. And then, even sometimes like, just to go back to your example about giving directions, like sometimes they'll repeat it back to you, and then like you're hearing it and you're like visualizing it in your head, like, okay. And then you might realize, oh no, it's the second mailbox.
Right.
Or, whatever. And that's, maybe a little way to think about like the revision process. Or they might, you gave them the directions, and then they get to your house and they're like, oh, actually, it was, the third crazy tree, or, and that can help you refine your directions for your next dinner guest.
That's right. Okay. Well, I feel like we've given people a good beginning to this, but if anybody has any questions, obviously they can come and ask us for sure. We also have Danielle alluded to this at the beginning, the Writers Workshop is a 7-month program that we co-created to help writers publish their book this year. It's a small program for 6 to 8 people, and we obviously have a passion for doing this, and we want to help as many people as we can to achieve that dream of publishing a book. I'm bringing all of my editorial and coaching experience. Danielle is bringing all of her graphic design, marketing, and branding experience to help give you basically a full publishing experience in this 7 months. And today is the last day of our early bird pricing and a special bonus of extra sessions with both of us. So if you are interested, check out our website at Writers Workshop HD, Heather and Danielle.com, and message us or let us know if you'd like to talk.
Yeah, we would love to, talk with you about your book and um, hear more about what you're up to. And so thank you so much for tuning in today and watching this blog to book webinar. We have a whole series that we've already done, and we've got, I think, another five, at least five scheduled. And so you can learn all about that at our website as well. Again, that's writersworkshophd.com. And that's all for today.
Yeah, the next one's going to be great too, because it's going to be take this concept we've talked about today and like move it forward with the marketing, how that can help your business. So
yeah, it's all about like how to use your book as a platform for your business, and how does it, this is the stuff that I totally geek out about. Like, okay, so where does your book fit in, and how can you take the concepts in your book and like maybe create a course, or you have a group coaching program, or your one-on-one, and all your funnels. And we're going to kind of pick apart and just sort of look objectively at some of the work Danielle Laporte has done with the Desire Map, which just totally blows my mind. And it's just amazing to look at how she took her book and has created this amazing suite of products and this empire from it. And so we'll also be taking a look at the Prosperous Coach and some of the ways that Rich Litvin and Steve Chandler have done something very similar in taking the concepts from that book and taking it forward. So just a little teaser, join us for that next one. You can again register for that on our website, www.writersworkshophd.com. Thanks, Heather. Bye.